Well, hey there, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible class here at Concord Road. I am so glad that you've tuned in. Thank you for joining us as we continue to work our way through the book of Numbers. And so if you have your Bibles, that's where you'll want to open to Numbers chapter 6. Last week we did some application on chapter 5. Well, this week we're going to take a look at chapter 6. While you're turning there, I hope everybody had a great new year. I hope the first few days of January 2021 have been good to you, and I sure hope the remaining days of 2021 will be good to you as well. First Wednesday class, that is, in the new year, Numbers chapter 6. Let's take a look, shall we? Well, I told you last week, and I told you the week before that the emphasis on this section that begins in chapter 5. The emphasis on this section is purity. It is all about purity. And that's what's at the forefront of the mind here in God's mind in chapter 6 as he gives Moses regulations concerning the Nazarites. Now, I'm probably pretty sure that most of you, this is a Wednesday night crowd. And so I'm pretty sure that most of you have heard of Nazarites and the Nazarite vow. If someone were to put you on a spot right now and ask you to tell everything that you know about Nazarites, you may not remember a lot, but I think you're probably pretty or somewhat familiar with the idea of a Nazarite. What is a Nazarite? And what's this Nazarite vow all about? Well, those are some things that we're going to learn tonight as we take a look at Numbers chapter 6. Well, let's start with just the meaning of the word, a Nazarite. What does the word mean? I don't know, you might have a footnote in your Bible that tells you what it means. It means one who is separated. And really the idea is that a person is separated to God. That's the idea. Now, you can see that in places like the book of Judges. Why don't you turn over to Judges chapter 16. Now, here in Judges chapter 16, you're going to see probably the most well-known Nazarite of them all, and that is Samson. And if you look here at Judges chapter 16, and you look down at about verse 17, Judges chapter 16, verse 17, this is where Delilah, you know the whole story of Samson and Delilah. I know you know that. And she gets here in chapter 16, and she finally extracts his secret, the secret to his great strength. And let's just start in verse 15, okay? And then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have deceived me these 3 times, and have not told me where your great strength is." It came about when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him that his soul was annoyed to death. She was, in other words, wearing him out. You want to talk about the squeaky wheel? Man, she is squeaking. She is the noisiest wheel that has ever lived. And so she is squeaking. She has annoyed him to death. Verse 17, so he told her all that was in his heart and said to her, "A razor has never come on my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God." See there, a Nazarite to God. So the word Nazarite means separated. We learn here that the idea, this is one of the places actually that we see that the idea is that it is one that is separated to God. So it's a person who decides to separate themselves as a special way of demonstrating their commitment to God. Now, who could do it? Could anyone do it? Yeah, anyone could do it. Men could do it. Women could do it. Now, there were, if a woman wanted to do it, though, she had to get permission to do it. Take a look at Numbers chapter 30. Turn over to chapter 30. Numbers chapter 30. Let's get over there. When you get over there, look down. Well, let's just start right really at the beginning of the chapter. Look at verse 1. Then Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the sons of Israel, and he said to them, this is the word which the Lord has commanded. Now look at verse 2. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to bind himself with a binding obligation, he shall not violate his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Make a vow, you keep it. Now look at verse 3. Also, if a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by the obligation in her father's house and in her youth, and her father hears her vow and her obligation by which she has bound herself, and her father says nothing to her, then all her vows shall stand, and every obligation by which she has bound herself shall stand. So, a person wants to make this vow to God. Any man wants to do it, he can do it. Any woman wants to do it, she's got to have the permission of her father. Look at verse 5. But if her father should forbid her on the day that he hears of it, none of her vows or obligations by which she has bound herself shall stand. She's made this vow. She's decided to make this commitment to the Lord. And Dad hasn't granted that permission. Well, and he says, nope, you can't do that. Then the vow that she makes is not binding. It says at the end of verse 5, and the Lord will forgive her because her father had forbidden it. Look at verse 6. However, if she should marry, okay, she's no longer with Daddy. She's married now. Can she make a vow anytime that she wants? Nope. Verse 6, however, she should marry while under her vows or the rash statement of her lips by which she has bound herself, and her husband hears of it and says nothing to her on the day that he hears it, then her vow shall stand. Okay, husband gives permission. If husband okays it, it stands. Verse 8, but if on that day her husband hears of it, he forbids it, then he shall annul her vow which she is under and the rash statement of her lips by which she has been bound herself, and the Lord will forgive her. So, yeah, anybody could take the Nazirite vow, but in the case of women, they had to have the permission of their legal representative, and that legal representative was either Dad or it was her husband. Okay, back to Numbers chapter 6. 3 requirements. Look at this, Numbers chapter 6. Here we go. Let's just read a few verses, okay? And you're going to see there's 3 requirements of a Nazirite. Look at verse 2. Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when a man or a woman makes a special vow, see, men or women can do it, but women have to have permission. The vow of a Nazirite. Oh, by the way, I told you you might have a footnote that tells you what the meaning of Nazirite is. My Bible does have a footnote. It says one separated. The vow of a Nazirite, to dedicate himself to the Lord, he shall abstain from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar, whether made from wine or strong drink, nor shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat fresh or dried grapes. All the days of his separation he shall not eat anything that is produced by the grapevine, from the seeds even to the skins. So the first requirement was a complete and total ban on all grape products and all intoxicating drinks. That's the first requirement, a total ban on all grape products and intoxicating drink. Second requirement, look at verse 5. All the days of his vow of separation, no razor shall pass over his head. He shall be holy until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall let the locks of his hair on his head grow long. So the second requirement then is he can't cut his hair for the duration of the vow. Now that probably seems pretty strange to us. But hair played a very significant role in ritual and legal practices of the ancient Near East. not just in Israel, but even in other nations in the ancient Near East. And probably the idea here was that it would be a visual distinction that would set them apart from everyone else. And so that's probably the idea here. Hair in the ancient Near East, we're told that often symbolized strength and power. And so that probably played into this requirement as well. But also probably the visual distinction. It is a visual announcement of this period of time that you are committing yourself in a special way to God's service. And then the third thing, look at verse 6. All the days of his separation to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead person. He shall not make himself unclean for his father or his mother, for his brother or his sister when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. You can't go near a dead body. That would result in ceremonial defilement. Remember all the stuff about purity in chapter 5 and ritual purity and impurity? This was one of the ways that ritual impurity happened. And so he can't go near a dead person. Mom or dad dies, to remain pure, he's going to have to someone else is going to have to deal with their circumstances and the preparation of their bodies to be buried. He can't do it, or he or she will be ceremonially defiled. So those are the three requirements. So the Nazirite vow was all about making a special vow for a period of time to emphasize a special commitment that you're making to God. Three requirements during that period, however long it was. You couldn't drink, or you couldn't, all grape products were forbidden. Drinking or eating. All intoxicating drinks were forbidden. Hair could not be cut during the duration of the vow. And you couldn't come in contact with any dead bodies during the period of the vow. Well, I keep saying during the period of the vow, during the period of the vow, during the period of the vow. How long was this vow? How long, if you made a Nazirite vow, how long did you have to, make this commitment for? Well, we really don't know. The Bible actually doesn't say. Here in the law of Moses, it just talks about making a vow, but no length of time is specified. But according to the rabbis down through history, the minimum was 30 days. And so most scholars believe that as that practice was handed down through generation and generation and generation, that most Nazirite vows at a minimum was 30 days. Now, Samson was a special case. Samson didn't choose to be a Nazirite. God chose for him. He was divinely proclaimed a Nazirite, and he would be a Nazirite for life. And so he was a special case. And so apparently some of these regulations didn't really apply to him. There, verse 6, all the days of his separation, he shall not go near a dead person. But, go back to Judges. Let's just go back to Judges for a minute. Go over to Judges chapter 14. Man, Samson was always making contact with the dead because he's killing a lot of people. And you'll see that in places. Look at Joshua chapter 4. Not Joshua. Judges chapter 14. Judges chapter 14. Look down about verse 19. When you get there. Then the Spirit of the Lord, I'll tell you what, let me give you 2 seconds to get there, okay? Judges chapter 14, get to verse 19. Judges chapter 14, verse 19. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. And he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 Philistines. Killed 30 of them, took their spoil, gave the change of clothes to those who took the riddle, or he told the riddle. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he killed 30 of the Philistines on this particular occasion. Again, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. That God was using him. God was using Samson as a deliverer from the scourge of the Philistines. And so, through God's work, Samson was killing a lot of people, even though he was a Nazirite. Look at chapter 15, where Samson burns these Philistine crops. And the Philistines say in verse 6, "Who did this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he took his wife and gave her his companion." So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, "Since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you. But after that, I will quit. In verse 8, and he struck them ruthlessly with great slaughter. I mean, that was Samson. So Samson is a little different case. He, again, is the most famous Nazirite. Like I said, he was a Nazirite divinely proclaimed from birth. I mentioned Judges 16 a minute ago, verse 17, where we saw him tell Delilah, "For I have been a Nazirite to God." And we were talking about the concept of this separation, one separated to God. But we didn't finish reading the verse, but he says, "I've been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb." And so, again, this wasn't a decision that Samson made. He was a special case. He was divinely proclaimed to be a Nazirite even before he was born. And so he's a special case. Evidently, some of the regulations didn't apply to him like they would someone who chooses to make this Nazirite vow. Okay, back to Numbers chapter 6 now. So what happens if you are defiled, though? Okay, you're not supposed to touch any dead body or you become defiled. Well, in case of defilement, that's what verses 9 through 12 is all about. We won't read all of those verses. You can read those on your own. But if contact with the dead is made, and you couldn't always avoid it, quite frankly, especially in the ancient world, then basically you would be unclean for 7 days. And on the 7th day, you became clean, and you would shave your head, and you would make a sacrifice, an appropriate sacrifice, and after that, you would be clean again, and you would start your vow all over again. And so that cleansing ceremony, by the way, and again, we don't have time to really take a look at it, you can find that over in chapter 19, verses 11 through 13. The ceremony that they would have to do if they were in the middle of a Nazirite vow and they became ceremonially defiled. Then, in chapter 6, beginning in verse 13, going down through verse 21, toward the end of the chapter, you have the completion of the vow described. The ceremony, when the vow is over, when you've completed the length of time, this is the ceremony. It involved extensive offerings. Again, we won't look at all of that. And so it was pretty expensive as the centuries unfolded. Taking a Nazirite vow simply because of the ending of the ceremony could be very, very expensive. And so later centuries saw the development of a custom where another person would, in an act of piety, they would pay these expenses for people who were taking the Nazirite vow. If you look over in Acts chapter 21, this might be the case here. In Acts chapter 21, it may allude to that custom. Verse 22, verse 23 and 24, "What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Therefore do this that we may that we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow." Paul is being told this, by the way, at Jerusalem by some of the leaders of the church, including James. "We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take them, purify yourself along with them, and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads, and all will know that there is nothing to the things which have been told." I'm not going to get into chapter 21, what that was all about, but they asked Paul to pay for their expenses. This seems to be the idea here. That's why I said this. It involved considerable expense because of these extensive offerings here. And then the bulk of the sacrifice that was made provided a sacrificial meal for the worshiper and his guests. And then part of that sacrifice, bread and certain portions of the sacrifice were given to the priest. And after that's finished, the ceremony is over. The sacrifices have been made. The vow then is completed and a person is released from all the restrictions that they had. So what was the purpose of the Nazirite vow? What was it all about? Well, I think what it was all about, and we're not really told what it was about. It says if a person wants to make a vow. And so apparently some people just wanted to express a higher level of commitment to God. They just wanted to express their devotion to God in a higher way. They wanted to express it in a formal, public way, and that really kind of seems to be we seem to be wired that way. Sometimes maybe you have thought, you just want to show your devotion to God in a higher way. It's not that you're living unfaithful. You're honoring God in your life, but you just feel that you want to honor Him in a higher way. And maybe that's what this ritual is all about. That's what it seems to be all about. That God recognizes this desire. Some people may want to express their devotion, and so they may choose to fast for a period of time and pray during that period. Maybe go out to a solitary place and for 48 hours and there fast and pray and commune with God and study His Word and that's very much like this. They just feel it's important to them. It is just within them this urge to demonstrate their commitment that way, or to make a contribution that is over and above what they normally give. They just an expression of devotion, their commitment to God and devotion in a special way. Well, again, I think that God recognizes that within us, and He probably gave this ritual, the Nazirite ritual, as a way to, as an outlet for that, as an opportunity for people to do that, and as a way to regulate that. You say, well, I haven't desired and unusually, to do something unusually demanding to show my devotion to God. Just follow His Word. Great. Hey, nothing wrong with that. Nothing. You don't need to feel guilty about that. But I'm just saying, and you may know some people like this, I do, that some people do feel that way from time to time. They really want to undertake something that is unusually demanding as a means of showing their devotion to God. And this seems to be what the Nazirite vow was all about. So, let's make some application, shall we? In the next 7 or 8 minutes that we have left, I think there's a couple of things that are worthy of consideration as we look at this. One is about vows, just vows, our word. And that's what the Nazirite vow was. If someone is going to make this unusually demanding commitment to God to demonstrate their devotion, they better keep it. And so this kind of prompts us to think about how good is our word. God has always demanded that His people keep their word. Turn over to Matthew chapter 5. Again, we go to the Sermon on the Mount. Some of these principles that are really emphasized here in the book of Numbers find expression in the Sermon on the Mount. Again, like we looked there last week when we were looking at application of chapter 5 and marital fidelity. We went to the Sermon on the Mount. Here in Matthew chapter 5, again, God addresses making oaths. And so look at verse 33. Right after his instruction about marital fidelity. He says, again, you've heard it that the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black, but let your statement be yes, yes, and no, no. Anything beyond that is of evil. What he's doing is he is addressing people who are taking vows lightly. Apparently, habits had developed among people where they would say they would do something, make a commitment, but they kind of had like a system that gave, a value to your word, your commitment. And if you made a commitment and you vowed it on this, then you really didn't you could break your word with impunity. But if you made that commitment and your vow was based on this, then that was a different matter. So you can see the games they played here, there in verse 34, where some made their oath by the throne of God, or earth, or the or by Jerusalem. If you made your vow, and you said, I swear on Jerusalem. Well, that wasn't the same. You weren't as obligated as if you made the commitment, I swear on God's holy character. No, Jesus is saying you can't play those games. They're taking vows lightly. And God made it very clear to the people who would take this Nazirite vow and make this commitment to him. Vows matter. They couldn't just simply back out of them. When we make a commitment, we need to honor those commitments. We need to be careful about, making commitments lightly. I don't think anybody made a commitment to the Nazirite vow lightly. We don't need to make commitments lightly. Commitments can be hard to keep because people don't think them through. There's not realistic time frames that they make. They don't really count the cost before they make a commitment. We need to do all of those things. We need to really think about how good is our word. And as we read about the Nazirite vow there in Numbers chapter 6, it really prompts us to think about how good is our word. Jesus says our word shouldn't need to be propped up with an oath. When we make a commitment, it ought to be as though that it was a sacred vow. Every time we say that we're going to do something, it ought to take go to the level of a sacred vow. The second thing that I'm reminded of as far as application goes is this whole concept of being set apart by God or for God. That's again what the word Nazirite means, one separated to God. But when we get over into the New Testament, we're all separated for God. We're all saints. And you've heard me tell you many times that the word saint, the root word for the word saint, is the same word as holy. Sanctified, holy, saint, sanctification, all of those have the same root word, which means to cut and separate something. And we are all saints. We have all been separated. Now, here's the difference. As we looked at the Nazirite vow in Numbers chapter 6 there, we said, there were 3 requirements for a Nazirite. Well, in the New Testament, there are more than 3 requirements when you decide to be set apart for God, when you obey the gospel. More than 3 requirements. The requirements of being set apart for God as a part of the New Covenant community is everything. It requires everything. It is to affect every aspect of our life. We talked about this last week when we talked about purity. We are to avoid defilement. Now, Now listen, we may set aside a special time and a special place to serve God. Like I said, we may choose to do something a little more rigorous and demanding to show our devotion. We may set aside a particular season of prayer, a time of prayer, a particular period of fasting. We may commit to going on a mission trip or participating in a special ministry, or go on a spiritual retreat, take our vacation time and do a spiritual retreat. All of these ways to set aside a special way to serve. We may do that, and that's great, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, don't forget that we're all separated from God, and that separation, the requirement for that separation, is ultimately everything. Okay. That is Numbers chapter 6. Well, not really. There is a very familiar part of Numbers chapter 6 that begins in verse 22, goes through the rest of the chapter in verse 27, and it is one of the most familiar sections of the book of Numbers. It's the priestly blessing. And so we're not going to look at that today. We'll pick up there with the priestly blessing as we finish up chapter 6 next week and get into chapter 7. And it's a beautiful priestly blessing. I'm looking forward to spending a little bit of time with that. In the meantime, thank you for joining us for our Bible study on this Wednesday. And Lord willing, I'll see you Sunday. Until then, take care and God bless.